you wrote you wrote an interesting article about Francisco Lindor and kind of the options that the Indians have laid out. Kind of take us through that and just if you're hearing anything at all on the national front as far as the Indians and Francisco Lindor go.
Well, the one option that I didn't put in there was to extend him, which of course is an option, but I think we all live here on planet Earth and acknowledge that it's gotten pretty deep into the process where an extension doesn't look particularly likely. And you look at the history. First of all, there's not a lot of history of a team in this market signing a player to what would probably, in all likelihood, be one of the top 5 contracts in MLB and building around that with also some arbitration raises for the likes of Mike Clevenger and Shane Bieber, perhaps trying to extend them. So it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. And we've all acknowledged that the most likely scenario is either he just leaves in free agency outright or they trade him. And then if you trade him, at which juncture do you do that? The best juncture in terms of the return you would have gotten back was last winter. They certainly entertained offers. They found nothing, quite to their liking, and they were ready to go into 2020 with Frankie Lindor as their shortstop and prime member of their lineup. But of course, everything got upended here by the virus, including the baseball season. And now it looks pretty dicey in terms of going into the season and perhaps trying to get a package for him mid-year, which was, of course, an option on the table in the original plan for 2020 was if the season goes south, you can trade Lindor and probably do pretty well. Well, now there's a lot of reason to doubt that they would do very well in that trade market. You can only acquire prospects who are in team 60-player pools for this shortened 60-game season. And on top of that, acquiring teams would be acquiring him for 2 playoff runs, not knowing if they'll even have an October this year. The season could be shut down at any moment. So it's a rough calculation. And also, it seems doubtful that the Indians would totally fall out of it in a matter of 38 days, which is what it would take to move him at this year's trade deadline. So and then you have complications with just team finances coming out of the shortened season and his rising arbitration price tag. So not that this was ever a uncomplicated conversation prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic has made it certainly more complicated.
The thing that keeps entering my mind is we saw the issues that are going to happen between the players' union and the owners just on agreeing how they're going to get this started and how they're going to deal with the season and the pandemic. They have to renegotiate a collective bargaining 2021. I think that probably makes Chris Antonetti's job that much more difficult because you need a crystal ball to see, is there going to be some form or fashion where, these $400 million contracts don't exist in that world after 2021?
Yeah, and that might be the case, again, maybe more related to the financial losses due to this pandemic than the actual CBA. And of course, there's always going to be that issue hanging in the air of, would they ever have a salary cap in baseball that would limit those top end contracts like a Garrett Cole? That's a pretty big conversation. And, given the rancor right now between the two sides and the difficulty of even implementing a revenue sharing structure just for the 60-game season, it doesn't feel particularly likely for 2022 and beyond. I think it's more likely that in some way would be addressed what players can make in the first 6 years of their career, in their arbitration years and before their arbitration years, because that's where we've seen, great impact, great performances from young players increasingly. And then, they're expectant of that big payday in free agency. And for a lot of guys, that big payday just hasn't been there in recent years. So it'd be interesting to see how they go about it. But I don't think it really changes the calculus too much for the Indians in terms of the CBA, just because, quite honestly and quite frankly, with a player of this caliber who's super marketable, super gifted as an athlete, he's got everything you could possibly want, and a lot of teams are going to want that. Let's be honest. And barring some drastic injury and loss of time on the field, he's going to fare pretty well to whatever the market is, relative to whatever the market is. And it's hard to imagine a scenario where the Cleveland team, whatever their name, by the way, is the team that can, give him the most lucrative offer. This is a guy who bet on himself very early in his career. After 2016, the Indians made a 9-figure offer to Lindor, and he was a fantastic player already by that point, but he hadn't really blossomed from the power perspective yet. but he bet on himself. He had a big signing bonus as a prominent draft pick. He was the face of New Balance baseball at a very young age, so he was in a good position to bet on himself, and he did, and he's capitalized on it in a big way so far. He's become an MVP type as opposed to just an all-star type. So, so to his credit, he's fulfilled, what he thought of himself and I'm sure eventually he'll fulfill what his free agent value is. I don't see that happening in Cleveland.